Hey, welcome to another edition of what are we calling this? Dad Huddle, something like
That
that.
Huddle. Yeah.
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 Hey, Mike, good to see you, man.
Good to see you too. How's it going?
We were talking off air, man. Oh, you've been lighting it up on LinkedIn, and I thought that that would be a place for us to begin a conversation today. Hopefully, we'll get some participants in this dialogue. Tell me about your what's been going on with you with LinkedIn and your you mentioned that you had taken some time off, and what's going on there?
Yeah, I sort of burnt out a little bit on creating content. I got to this point where I was satisfied with like why I was creating content.
Yeah.
Hold on one second. But I I felt like I could predict the comments that were coming. Like I could post something and I knew just like one person's gonna say this, one person's gonna say that. And I got a little tired. And right around the time that I was doing that, I think on every journey, but especially with content creation, you should have other content creators that you like can go to. So I happened to be in Denver, so I met up with a friend of mine, Q, who's on LinkedIn as well. He's one of the first LinkedIn video creators.
Yeah, I saw some.
And
You linked some of his stuff. He's good. He's got some good stuff.
yeah, I mean, great. Like, I'm actually trying to convince him to come do this project with me soon.
Cool.
Um, but we were sitting in this coffee shop, and he was like, "Do you need to be creating content right now, or do you need to be like living life?" I was like, "You know what? I'm gonna try living life for a while." So
Yeah, yeah, and you've got your
I
kids at
just
home too, man, right?
yeah, exactly. So where I decided to put less time into content. I backed out of some consulting contracts that I was working on,
Hmm.
and I spent time building into our homeschool program, but also just like going on long walks with my kids and just hanging out, watching movies. So
Yeah, man, that's you again as a parent of adult, quasi adult 20-year-olds, 18 and 17-year-olds. You will not miss or regret those choices. So more power to you,
uh,
brother. All right. So for those joining us, thank you. Had a conversation with Mike briefly before we came online about his writing over the last couple days, and he's been just lighting it up. And so what I thought we would do is frame the conversation based a little bit on what I've been reading from Mike, and but also some of it that I've been feeling. And so for the folks that are joining us, Cindy, hey, thanks for joining. Welcome, Brandon. Hey, man, good to see you. Thanks for joining up. Mike has taken a really hard and I think well argued position around education. And so let me bring up the post that got me going. Like Mike is bringing the heat. Let me bring it up here. Here we go. Okay, so he starts with just if you can, you should probably pull your kid out of school or out of the public school system. Emphasis on if you can. So, Mike, tell me a little bit more about this post. What were you thinking, and what is your aim with this deal?
yeah, that came after quite a long talk with my wife. We talk about this a lot about whether or not. So, if anyone were to follow my wife Alex on social media, she is far like more direct than I am, and
Really?
will like. I mean, yeah,
So she's the brains of the group, huh?
I mean, like she is like it's she sees the world as black and white. Like she's always been that way. She's like it's this or that,
No.
and so for her, it's like she would tell you in this post, cut the emphasis on if you can. She was like, you just should like you
Mm.
should pull your kid out of school and you should do whatever you have to do to make that happen. And so I believe that as well. But one of the things that I was talking to her and some other people about was how bad the problem really is.
Yeah.
We were talking about the teacher shortage, and I was telling them I was like, it's beyond teacher shortage. It's after school care, it's counselors, and then superintendents. If you can't fill the highest, most powerful, most lucrative position in the district,
Right.
in I mean, we both live in Texas, and there's this unique thing that happens at some schools here, like in Houston, it's Katie. where the football coach, the head football coach, makes more than the superintendent. But
Right.
that's very rare. So like typically you're the number 1 or 2 paid person in the district, and you can't fill those positions.
Yeah.
So to me, that's a sign of this the snake rotting from the head.
Wow.
I mean, and so I have I just remembered that conversation, or I remember this article after that conversation,
Yeah.
and I thought, you know what, let me just post this. If people can't tell, by the way, most of my content is going to be convincing people to take alternative methods for schooling from now on.
But yeah,
For
but
kids.
you make arguments about it. You're just not saying do this. You're saying here's why. And like so in
Yeah,
this
yeah.
this article that you linked here from the Hetchinger, is that how it's pronounced? Hetchinger report?
Hinchner. Yeah.
Hitchner, sorry. That's a reputable source for education content, and they're not like grinding axes.
Right.
It's very kind of honest and straightforward, and they're making a compelling argument that superintendents are not showing up. They're not. There's a shortage of superintendents, and to your point, Mike, there's a reason for it.
Yeah, yeah, and I also like. I think that if anybody questions the importance of a superintendent, I think that's one of the positions where you don't see or hear from that person a whole lot as a parent or a teacher, and so it's easy to forget or misunderstand how important they are. The example I always give people is North Dakota. That whole state has a group of superintendents that just decided together, we care about innovation. And so there's like, whether it's Corey Steiner, Dr. Corey Steiner from Northern Cass, which is in North Dakota, they've gotten rid of traditional grades in their whole district. Now it's a
What?
small, yeah, oh yeah, small 600 person district, 600 students, but they have gotten rid of grades, and then they validated what they do in their schools by literally just saying, hey, North Dakota State, show up, come to campus and see what we got. Fargo, North Dakota is moving there as well. The biggest district in the, as a matter of fact, the superintendent of Fargo was my assistant speech coach when I was in college, or when in high school.
Is that right?
Yeah,
So you infected him back then, huh?
Well, yeah, somewhat, yeah. And his wife is the superintendent of the neighboring district. So like,
snap.
they are all very close, and they agreed on what innovation looked like, and they're all pursuing that together. And because they recognize we're the most powerful seats in this district, we make the decisions that move. And so if you have a great superintendent, it means great things. But if you don't, it means,
Well, so I don't know if you saw my post, but my response to your comment was, it's not just teacher shortages and superintendent shortages. It's also hard to find school board members who are not just applying or running for their own selfish interests, right? And so in Houston, which is where I am, that has been the dominant dynamic for decades. And I've talked about this. There's only three reasons that people run for school board in Houston. One is because they have an axe to grind. They're angry about something, CRT, whatever the issue is. They're angry about something, and that's the only thing that's motivating their run. The second one is self-interest, and this is the big one. So these are the folks who have connections with vendors. These are the folks that have political aspirations. So they're running not because they really care about the kids, but because they know this is the first step on their career into politics. And then hopefully the third are the least number, and that's the kids or the adults that are actually trying to change the system to help kids. And those folks usually get boxed out by groups 1 and 2. So this is a problem, and until families start realizing that their kids are under threat if they stay in the system, then families aren't even aware of the importance of walking.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think, man, like Houston's got the TEA takeover, right? Like the district takeover. So a lot going on there, but
yeah. I was just having a I'm let me get your take on this, Mike. So I've been putting out these videos about the takeover, and the last one, the one I was working on today, is there was an interview with the commissioner of education, a guy named Mike Morath, and I don't argue that he doesn't have the right intentions. My argument, though, is that the system is actually broken, and the system is largely led by the standards that he is putting in place, right? So they're judging schools by a set of standards that really have no alignment with the future of work or life. And then they're punishing kids and schools if kids don't meet this standard that doesn't really matter. So that was the argument I'm making in this rebuttal. It'll be interesting to see how that's regarded.
Yeah, and I'll say, like, I'm glad you're doing that, because Mike Morath is an interesting figure, because I mean, I have a lot to say about him. And
Yeah, because he was in Dallas.
Yeah. Most of what I have to say about him is not good, but he is, to me, he is a symbol of a person in decision making power that chooses to be far away from the classroom, and often doesn't realize how far removed. And I think this is like this is where, like, those high ranking positions like superintendent, for him, commissioner of education for TEA, right? Like, this is where it goes bad. I remember interactions with TEA, because I taught at a school once that was on the list. And if you're not familiar with the list, that is a list of schools that they about to close if you don't improve. And
what happened?
I remember like high, low ranking, like all sorts of officials from TEA coming into the building, and my classroom, because it was unique, it was not like every other classroom. It became a dog and pony show. Like, they were like, let me take you to this classroom first so you can see how great our teachers are.
Yeah.
And I just remember, like, thinking, man,
pimped.
they have no idea. Yeah, exactly.
You were pimped. Yep.
And I'm like, I could have been a horrible teacher every other day of the week.
Right. Yeah.
Like, they had no idea. But these people, every time I spoke with them, my students could see it. They could hear it. And I was like, oh, you haven't been in a classroom in years. Like, you don't know. And even me, like, when people ask me about public education, I tell them I can talk about it from a bird's eye view. I can talk about it in theory. But, like, even I am so far removed from what happens inside of a classroom that I just don't know what it's like anymore. Yeah. So I think, like, Mike Morath makes me think of that. It's like the guy who's like approving the standards doesn't spend enough time in those classrooms. And, like, that's where, like, if you either don't have a person with that decision making power, or if you're not doing the real legwork, that's where it becomes really dangerous.
Yeah. Well, and the thing that in listening to the interview, it was a 40-minute interview with one of our reporters here locally. What came up over and over again for me was that the system is built for the adults. It's not built for the kids. I mean, a very, very simple example that I was talking about with a buddy today was, what happens when a kid arrives late to school? There's a punishment. There's some shaming. There's a blame on the parent, somebody, but there's never a question about, hey, how you doing? What's going on? Is there something we can help with? There's never a conversation with the parent. Hey, how you doing? What's happening? Is there something we can do to help you? It's always an adversarial relationship, because fundamentally, every school, the goal of the school is to get the kids to pass the standard test. And if the child is late, now we're infringing on that opportunity to pass that standard, versus as a space of empathy of, hey, let's pause and let's slow this down. Let me know your thoughts. Like, teachers don't seem to have space to slow things down and to deal with the realities of what's going on in the life of the child, because they're always under the standards gun, don't you think? Or am I off on that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, as a teacher, you literally have to break the rules to care about kids sometimes. I mean, when I taught in a traditional system, there was two things that I always did. The first one was that I never taught a tested subject. I just knew that I couldn't handle it. And even still, I was disappointed, because I would often, in the second semester, even though I was teaching history, they would tell me, oh no, now you need to teach reading, because they need to, like, we got to get off the list. Like, you need to teach reading. And I would refuse. I'd say, no, I teach reading comprehension all year, because
that's
part of learning history is reading.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they started to squeeze you in order to use your time and to get kids ready for a test. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. And so I mean, you know, and so thing number one is, yeah, like I would avoid tested subjects. The second thing that I would do is I built a really good relationship with the ISS teacher, the
Hmm.
in school suspension teacher, because I knew that if there were a situation where I had to send a kid to ISS because of the rules,
Yeah.
I had liberties that no other teacher did. Where like I could go in there and teach a whole nother class period. As a matter of fact, at one point, my principal never knew about this. I basically like I got on Zoom, they pulled it up in the smart board, and my class was live streamed into there all day long.
What?
So like,
So
yeah,
you
like in
broke
my
the,
class, they
yeah, you broke the
broke
rules.
the rule. Yeah, like literally, like my the students in my class knew like behavior typically wasn't an issue because I wouldn't send them to the principal's office or the counselor before they went to in-school suspension. I would just send them straight there, and they knew like, well, at least I'm not. I guess I'm not going to miss this. I'm like, no, you're not. Like you're not escaping me. Not even in there, you know. So if I had a student who was chronically late,
Yeah.
and it was one of those cases where it's like, hey, there's nothing I can do. They're standing in the hallway. They can see you walking in here. You're going to go to ISS. Well, I was like, well, the least I can do for you is that you won't miss my class.
Hmm.
Like you will miss all those other classes, but I'm teaching learning how to learn, and I'm teaching reading comprehension through the history of the world in a way that's interesting.
Yeah.
And so the same materials I had for them doing group projects in my class, I took them down to ISS. They, so they were literally, I was like distance learning before that. This was like 2014 to 2016. So like before that was even a thing.
Yeah, but again, like you had to work around the system because the
Absolutely.
system isn't really thinking about the child. The system is thinking about what's efficient. And what's efficient is
Yep.
the child that shows up late. You take them out, you punish them
Yeah.
because they broke a rule, not
Right.
again something creative about how do we keep this child engaged in the process. And my guess would
Yeah.
also be that if of all the classes, my guess would be that that child liked yours most. And so if they
A lot
missed,
of times.
right, if they were late,
Yeah.
there's something else going on, or at least there could
Mhm.
be. But that's not a consideration.
No, I mean, I remember I had a student. I taught at a sixth grade center once, and I had a student who I had him in first period, which started at 9:30, and he came to class every day around 9:45, 10
Yeah,
o'clock,
yeah, yeah,
and that happened after a week. And I was like, "Hey, man, like, what's what's up? Like, why you
yeah.
keep coming late?" And he said, "Well, this was in Fort Worth, Texas," and he was like, "Well, I actually live in Euless, and I live on a farm." And I have responsibilities before I can come to school.
Snap.
And so I was like, "Oh, say no more.
Right,
Like, let's talk
right.
about like how we can exchange part of that for your because at that time I was teaching world cultures and geography. So I was like, look, man, you know more about Texas geography than most of these kids will learn all year already."
Yeah,
So he actually became a co-teacher. Like he can't, so I had to get creative, but I remember him being punished over and over and over again for something that he and I fought. And I was like, what he's doing is productive. I'm okay with it. Please allow him to come to school late. They're like, no, no, no. He kept getting hit with truancy notices.
yep, yep.
Like we did a whole like our class staged a protest against the district because they were like all the other kids were like, no, what he's doing is like he's living real life. He's taking learning to real life.
Yeah.
We got shut down. We went through the whole thing, the whole rebel thing. So, but
All
that
right.
story it sticks out because it was like a real reason for him to be late.
That's right. And really, he should have been celebrated for doing stuff on the
Yep,
farm
exactly.
and then getting to school at all. He should
Yeah,
have been celebrated.
exactly. Yeah,
All
yeah.
right. So
We
so
could have
you
just
make
done it
the
from the farm.
argument, Mike. You make the argument that kids should, parents should pull their kid out of school if they can. Let's talk
Mhm.
about the details of that.
Yeah.
So, what are the conditions that you think that parents should seriously consider doing this? And then let's talk more about other alternatives there.
Yeah, I think the first one is so the first thing I'll say is I know that the options are limited. So the first thing I think a parent should think about is what options are available to them, like
Yeah.
around their house. So like if there's like an Acton model school, so I've been people have DM'd me and they're like, about Acton.
Yeah. Why don't you tell people about Acton real quick, just to make sure we can get a plug for them?
Yeah, so Acton is I feel like I'm going to butcher what they are because we actually took Acton and like, but
I can
Acton's a
Yeah, I can fill it in if
Oh
you
yeah,
need.
yeah. Go ahead, go
Yeah.
ahead, go ahead, go ahead.
So Acton started in Austin, Texas, but it's a model. It's essentially it's a micro school, and the
Yeah,
school is based on the belief that the young person is capable of leading their own learning. And so one of the couple principles that govern it. One is that teachers don't answer questions for kids. The, the kid's responsibility to figure out how to answer their own questions. Another one is that the child doesn't look to the teacher as a teacher. The teacher, I think, is called either a coach or a guide, right?
guide. Yeah,
Yeah, it's a guide. Yeah. So the model is really about learner empowerment, learner uplift, rather than top down. Here's what you're going to learn and when and how, and it's done in a micro
yeah,
environment.
yeah. And I personally love acting because they're all over the place, and
And growing,
we
growing
actually,
fast.
yeah, very. And at Alpha, so we built a school in Austin as well that technically came out of Acton. So like we took that Acton model and we boiled it down to 3 promises that we would make to parents, and then created some other elements that made it, unique and different.
Yeah.
And now that model Alpha is going to be the official model of SpaceX. They're about to announce it. I think they announced it today. So
Is that right?
yeah. So it was cool. Like, but inspired by Acton. So I have a lot of respect for the Acton model, especially the reason why I say look for an Acton is because I just believe that their model works in a lot of different places in a lot of different contexts. But the second reason is at Acton, if you don't have one in your neighborhood, they will give you the support and resources to start one.
Yep.
As a matter of fact, on their website, there is a big green button that says "Open an Acton Academy,"
Yeah.
and I believe in this so much as like your first step, because the school that literally changed my career, it was when I started posting on LinkedIn when I was there. It was the coolest project that I had ever worked on, the one that I just mentioned, Alpha. Well,
Yeah.
the founder of Alpha, literally, this is his story. He had 2 daughters. Yep, that big green button right there.
Yep. Yep.
So he had 2 daughters in school. One of them was an incredible volleyball player. Now she plays volleyball. I think San Jose State, wherever Misty May Trainer is coaching, that's where she plays.
Okay.
So she's an incredible volleyball player and was actually a straight A student. Took the standardized test and had testing anxiety, so she failed it. And they said, well, we have to hold your daughter back in the 8th grade. She can't go on to high school. And he was like, that's absolutely ridiculous. You're not going to hold my kid back. So he pulled both of his kids out and knew nothing. And somebody told him Acton. He basically interned for free at an Acton. This was before they had this like launch an Acton Academy thing.
Yeah.
And then he basically launched a school with 20 kids in his garage. And that was the beginning of what is now this really cool model called Alpha. So
wow.
if you think you can't, you can.
Yeah.
So like he went from being frustrated pulling his kid out to now building something that's the official model of SpaceX.
Wow.
Right. So so I think thing number 1 is to look around and see what, asset map your community. If you're in Houston, for example, there's some great school. Reach out to people who know, right? Like the Post Oak School in Houston is a Montessori school. One of the few, I think it's like one of 30 Montessori schools that have a high school program.
Yep.
Can't say enough good things about them.
Yep.
But look up your options. And then I think thing number 2 to consider is homeschool. Obviously, like I think if you have, when I say if you have 2 parents in the home and you can afford to go to one income, or if let's say you're a single parent and you just are fed up, there's no other options, you can't afford private school, homeschooling should still be on the table for you. I don't know if I'll find this and post it somewhere. I'll probably make a post about this later, but the average income of a typical public school parent is the exact same as the average income of a homeschool parent.
Yeah.
It's $73,000 a year.
Yeah. It's not expensive.
Right. And look, I will just say right now, anybody, if you're thinking about pulling your kid out and homeschooling them, I have a homeschool program that we use for our kids. We give it away for free. We don't charge anything. It's free learning apps, free projects. Like we give it away for free.
So here's what I'd recommend, Mike. I'd recommend that any parent that listens to this, and I'm going to clip this part, but any parent that listens to this, take them up on this. Even if you're not sure if you want to homeschool, take a look and see what he's doing. and then consider the possibility of starting an experiment this upcoming summer where you're now quasi homeschooling your child over the summer and seeing how it goes. Test the model. What you'll likely find is if you do it for 2 months or maybe 3 months, you will find that these kids start to love to learn, that the relationship with the family starts to change. There's less stress, there's less anxiety between the child and parent. There's a whole bunch of benefits that come as a result of a different model of learning, and that most parents don't seem to appreciate until they try it.
Yeah.
But if Mike's offering this free, kind of structure, take him up on it, try it out, test it, and see how it works. Because I'll be willing to bet that we will find it to be a great benefit. Here, Mike. I got a couple points from Brandon, who's watching. He says Acton is called a school, and then in parentheses he says, where I'd love the define characteristics of less desirable versus desirable. I guess he's saying that he doesn't like the term school.
Me either.
Yeah. I think I think sometimes we use that term just because people understand it, not because it's the right term, right? But Brandon, give me more clarity what you mean there by the defined characteristics of less desirable versus desirable. I'd like to hear more about that.
And I'll even chime in there. Like when we started Alpha, it was called Emergent Academy. And we went through this rebrand where we actually hired some of the best branding team, one of the best branding agencies in the world called Tilted Chair. They built the Red Bull brand, Monster, the MLS. And it was really important to us that the word school, academy, like that was not attached to our name because we didn't want students to equate what they were doing with school.
Yeah.
That's why we just called it Alpha. And people to this day, they're like, Alpha School. Nope. Just Alpha, right?
Yep.
And so my good friends at Learn Life, which is in Barcelona, another fantastic model, they say this phrase there, which is school is a dirty word. Like all the baggage that comes with it. Yeah. So I feel that, Brandon. I feel that.
Yeah. Well, and so keeping on that train. So again, one of your major arguments is that parents should be really considering pulling their kid from school. And one point you're making is that the cost of it is not as high as you might think. Two, there are models out there that you can maybe plug into. Again, Mike is offering one model based on his own experience and what he's doing with his kids. And my argument, again, is 3, experiment with it. Test it this summer. Yep. We're coming up on summer. Try it out. Tell your child this summer we're going to do something a little different. It's not free time. I called it preseason when I had kids at this age. I said, "Hey, this is not off season, y'all. This is preseason. We're getting ready."
That's right.
And in preseason, we work. But I bet you if you're doing what Mike argues, it doesn't feel like work for the kids or the family.
That's right. We go year round.
Yeah. Right. Why wouldn't you? Right. And one of the things that I found having homeschooled our own kids, but this is the part that parents never see until they actually try it. And that is that the conversations around the dinner table change. Right?
Yep.
The child now starts asking questions and the parent's like, yeah, I was thinking the same thing. And what about this? It just changes 180 degrees. That is where the learning now begins to become evident around the dinner table. And again, try that. Brandon clarifies a couple things. So he said it. We started the conversation with pull kids from school. Then we pivot to say homeschool, and Acton school is good, but the other one is bad. What characteristics should we run from and run to? That's a great question, Brandon. What characteristics are we looking for here?
Well, I think like one of the things that we're saying, Brandon, is like, I think, well, both of us are strong proponents of homeschooling because we've done it. And, but I mean, I think any like intellectually honest and objective observer can say that the traditional public school system, which means this is like your compulsory teacher in front of the room lecturing students for a number of time before they get passed on to the next class, right? That is what I would define as quote unquote bad. And here's why I think it's bad. We started actually with an article that I posted about how there's a superintendent shortage. Well, the big bad thing there is like I'm taking that as a symbol of a collapsing system, a system that can't even fill the highest position of leadership.
Right.
That it is literally like bootstrapped itself to that person's ability to lead. Before a state agency takes over a school district, they evaluate the success or failure of its superintendent.
Yes.
And so if you can't fill the highest level of leadership, then earlier we said this is sort of like, animal riding from the head down, right? So like you can't fill teacher roles. There's a massive teacher shortage. You can't fill, and not only is there a massive teacher shortage, but by the way, there's a teacher attendance issue as well.
Yes.
Teachers are like, they're taking off work more than they ever have.
Yes.
And you're also seeing, for the first time in the history of the American public school system, you're seeing teachers with enough scale for it to be concerning, ghosting their jobs. This is something that was once reserved for hourly positions, where it's like,
Yes.
I don't want to work at Starbucks anymore. I'm just not going to show up. Teachers are starting to do this. And I can tell you, as somebody who's building a hiring tool to help teachers transition, they're not doing it because they have another job. They're doing it because they're at a breaking point, and
Right.
they're literally staying unemployed for 6 months while they try to transition or hire a coach to help them. So what we're saying, Brandon, is like, the traditional public school system, the alarms are ringing, the building is on fire, and the floors are starting to collapse. And I've made this post saying people should get out of it.
Yeah. Let me go a little bit further. And Brandon, some of the other things that I would argue is the definition of good versus bad against school is the level of learner leadership. So in most schools, there is an adult that has decided before they even meet the kids oftentimes what's going to happen in that classroom, what the child's going to be evaluated on. So that means that the learner has no agency. And if they have no agency, then now they are essentially waiting to be taught, waiting to be told what to learn. And in the 21st century, a child who waits to learn is going to be run over by a truck. A child has to be actively engaged in their learning. And so Acton, again, and other models like it really lead to a kid who loves to learn and loves to learn on their own energy, not a teacher looking over their shoulder or a parent hammering the child to get their homework done. That is to me the most important definition of good and bad. And how do you see it? Into the classroom, ask this super simple question. Actually, two questions. The first one is, "Hey, child, what are you really curious about, or what would you like to learn about?" Right? A lot of times the kid won't know, but let's assume that they say, I don't know, bugs. Yeah. Then ask the follow-up question. How much time do you get on a given day to learn about bugs? And the answer will be close to zero, if not zero. So that's what you're hearing then, is that the child has no agency, no control, no authority over what they learn. It's all top-down driven. And again, my argument is that is the signal of a system or an educational environment that is not productive for the child. I hope that helps, Brandon. So
a great way to put it.
Yeah, Christine has joined us. Thank you. These are great topics. Thank you for addressing challenging issues in education. Thank you, Christine. Thanks for joining. Okay, Mike. So we started the conversation about that it's time for parents to seriously consider pulling their children out of school. You talked about some of the reasons why that makes sense. Let's now talk about some of the reasons where and why a parent should not pull their kid out of a public educational system.
Yeah, I mean, I think the primary reason is, well, if I am honest, there are. So I don't want to paint the picture that every single public school is rotten. There are some public schools that actually I believe do great work, like great things for kids. And honestly, some kids, like there are some kids who are able to navigate, and that is actually the right model for them.
Yeah.
I recognize.
So we should just, sorry to interrupt you, Mike, but we should just make sure that is clear that this model actually works for some. And so, and that's maybe your first point, that if it's working, and again, we should probably define what that means a little bit, but if it's working, maybe this is the right model.
Yeah. And so I would say, like, actually, I was talking to a parent last week who has a daughter who is a high school freshman. and mom wants her to go to the University of Texas, but her daughter wants to go to Brown. Okay, so I literally was like, hey, don't go to one of these new, flashy, innovative models because Brown doesn't care about the University of Texas, doesn't care. As somebody who like tried to get the University of Texas to come to an innovative model, they were like, yeah, we don't care. We care if they're top 5%. Right. So like, you know, there is that reality that like if you decide, which I actually think right now, every kid who's in high school right now, every one of them, I think should seriously consider college. But from the 8th grade on down, that's where I sort of think about this sliding scale in my mind where I'm like, I don't know if it's so necessary. If your kids are in elementary school, college system is going to look drastically different by the time they're up. But I think, you know, everybody in high school right now should consider college, not necessarily be gunning for college, because I just believe that no two young people are the same. There are some young people who I know who I absolutely would discourage from going to college because they have found their thing.
Yes.
Found the place where they're skilled, they're knowledgeable, and they're passionate.
Yes.
And sometimes college is where you go find that. But if you find that at 16 or 17 or 15 or 14
or 12, let's be honest.
Or 12, right?
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. I'm hoping my daughter's found it at 7. Like my daughter's falling in love with photography. So I'm like, let's stoke this fire so that you don't feel but I would say like for any parent where you like, if your kid is fixated on college, then I would say the traditional system is fine. Or like if they're happy and it's working, I think friendships are something to consider. But I don't have a strong argument for this.
Yeah.
Well,
let's go back and forth on this one because you're touching on some areas that I'm actually I've got some opinions about. So first off, thank Christine. Thanks for joining.
Love that.
Happy to be here. Great conversation. Really, thanks for joining. So let me try to answer that question about like when a child should consider staying in the model in the traditional model. We have to be really careful about how we define success. So if success is a child who's happy at school, there are a lot of kids who are happy and crappy, right? Or I should say that school is a happy, crappy school. So I go to school, I get to hang out with my friends. I like hanging out with my friends. I'm happy there, but I don't really like to learn. And so if a child, stay in a school if your child loves learning in that environment. If they don't love learning in that environment, then you might be setting your child up for a crash, right? And that's the child who, again, not learning what they need to learn, not really preparing themselves for adult life. Then they hit 19 or 20 years old and life comes at them like a truck and runs them right over because they don't know the skills of learning. They don't have a desire to learn. So stay in the environment if your child loves learning in that environment. If they don't, I would consider this like you would consider a patient in a hospital. If your child was admitted into the hospital and they're not getting better, then you need to seriously consider getting them out of that hospital and getting them someplace else, right? And better in the educational environment is the kid who every day is growing more and more interested in learning, more and more curious, more and more clear about what makes them unique. And like you mentioned, you've got a daughter who is excited about photography. Stoke that doggone fire and see where it leads because you have no idea. Now, one other piece about this is when the young person says, I want to go to college, that's why I want to stay in the traditional model of education. Having sat on a selective public board and actually private college board as well, I can tell you that the daughter who is deep into photography, who has started a business, who has traveled the world doing photography, and she applies to Brown, Brown's going to be like, hey, we want you to come in tomorrow. And we're going to throw money at you too, because you are different. You clearly identified an area of interest to you, and you're going to enrich our campus. We've got enough straight A, 1600 SAT folk on our campus. We want somebody who has traveled the world, has a skill, can bring some depth and interest to our campus. So I don't want people to just assume that the traditional model is the best path to a college degree. It is not. So I wanted to push back on that a little.
No, I actually agree with you. I would argue it is it is not the best path to college for sure. It's funny because it's funny that we mentioned Brown in that example, because the example I gave this mom is one of my favorite poets, that I actually had the pleasure of spending a lot of time with
Oh,
a couple of years ago, is named Sarah Kay.
okay.
Sarah Kay is a spoken word artist. She's got like a multiple TED talks. She used to be on TED's podcast,
Oh, wow.
and she's been, yeah, she's been an amazing poet since high school, right?
Wow.
Um, and that she went to Brown. And actually, it's interesting. She at Brown, she met the person who's now her business partner. They run an organization called Project Voice, where they teach poetry in schools.
Oh,
And her
nice.
business partner, yeah, her business partner's name is Phil Kay, but they're not related. But they have this like uncanny, like Phil's sister's name is Sarah,
Oh,
and
my.
Sarah's brother is named
Yeah,
Phil.
they're connected on a spiritual level
Yeah,
somehow, right?
yeah. And she's Kay, he's Kaye, but like, like it's just like it was like whoa, and they met each other because they were like the two poets on campus.
Right,
But
right.
they realized, and they will both tell you like that was a part of why Brown thought it was valuable, is because they knew that I had this other thing that
Yes.
was really important, and I mean, I'd argue that Brown's proud of them.
Yes. And let's also be clear for the parents that are thinking about college or the kids that are thinking about college. Um, we gotta start separating this idea that I'm going to bend myself to what I think the
Right.
college actually wants from me, right? Because the
Yep.
colleges that, like a Brown, actually Brown is unique in this regard. They want unusual kids. They want kids that have a different
Yep.
platform. A UT, because they get thousands and thousands of applicants each year, they probably just want A students and SAT scores, and they're going to make their decision about that. Do you really want to be in an environment where they look at you like a number, as opposed to
Right.
a Brown or a number of other Oberlin? I mean, a bunch of schools in the Midwest, highly regarded schools, that look at the kid and
Vassar.
go, Vassar, sure. There's a bunch of schools like this. Actually, there used to be a website, schools that change lives. It's probably still up and running.
Oh wow,
Yeah, yeah.
that's
Or
cool.
universities or colleges that change lives or something like that. But you want to go to a university where you fit. And if you have an
Yeah.
interest in something, and going to a place where they say we actually value that interest, that's a very different space than going to a university where they say, you know what, we don't care what you're interested in. You sit down and you do what we tell you to do, which is generally what high school is for most kids. So
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's like you don't need the 13th grade. That's right.
that's right. The 13th, 14th grade, 15th grade,
Yeah.
et cetera. Okay, so let's now
Yeah.
go back to, we got about 15 minutes. For folks that are listening, feel free to ask questions. Just send it in the chat, and we'll address it. We talked a little bit about if you leave, or if you're how to consider leaving. We talked about when you should consider staying. And now let's talk a little bit about special populations that should be thinking about this even more acutely. A couple come to my mind, but
Ooh.
what special populations should be saying, I'm going to err on the side of getting out, even though I'm not certain what
Oh.
that space looks like outside? Any thoughts? Because I've got some. If you don't,
I mean, I have some, but you can start this one. You start this
okay. All right. So if you are a parent of a black boy,
one. Oh yeah.
you need to err on the side of getting out. And why do I say that? For several reasons. The first one is there is a pernicious and consistent lower expectation in the public education system and private education system for black boys. There's an assumption, and I saw it up close with my own son. There's an assumption that they're not as capable. It's palpable. I could tell you some stories about how it was really clearly identified. I can tell you also stories about on boards I've sat. I've sat on 10 educational boards where the conversation essentially was these poor little black boys and black and brown boys. Yes, the trouble with black boys. Yep. These little black boys, we want them to do well in our school, so we'll lower the standard for them. That is extraordinarily dangerous. But it happens all the time. So that's one of the populations. If you have a black boy in the public system, I would argue that you should be seriously looking hard at what do I do differently and how do I make sure that my boy is in, is encouraged to realize his power, his
Yeah. And
capability. Yeah, jump
can I
in.
add? I'm going to add to that. The numbers are just not in our favor, right? We know that 80% of teachers are middle-aged white females.
Yes,
We know
particularly
that
in the early grades.
55%. That's
Right.
right. Yeah,
Yep.
exactly. Heavily skewed to your early grades,
Yep.
which are extremely important
Huge.
for your boy's growth and development.
Yes.
Um, you got it's like 65% of school leaders are 50 and up white males,
Yes.
right? So it's like you have a school. Just the numbers show you that typically your child is not going to have another black male to look up to unless they're an athlete and they happen to have a black coach in the building, right? My school experience was an anomaly because I had black male teachers who were not coaches all throughout and I just happened to grow up in Houston, which I believe is a magical place. And my mom worked in the district, and there was a rule at the time where I could go to any school in HISD because she worked at the district.
Yeah.
So my mom, she
She
checklist.
navigated. Yep.
Like, yep. So, but if I did not have that privilege, I would have been, I mean, because of my mother, I was able to navigate that system. Because that book, Trouble with Black Boys, my mom put it in my hand when she said, "Oh, you want to be a teacher? This is the book that helped me navigate your school experience." And she's like, "If you ever meet this man, you shake his hand and you tell him I love him. I met him last year at ASUGSV, and I was like, my mother has given me all of your books." Took a picture with it, right?
Oh, and you sent to your mom?
Yeah. So when I put that book in the chat, like I really just like the numbers are not in our favor
Yeah.
on this one. So I'm so with that.
Yeah.
What's another group that you got? I'm really interested in this.
Well, I would say that any population of kids who are excited about something weird, right?
Yeah.
So, and even I would argue that excited about weird, that even includes sports.
Yep.
Yep. I got to tell you, I am ambivalent about the NCAA tournament. I used to be a big basketball fan, big football fan, and the more I kept looking at the data around this thing, these kids are getting exploited. And so my argument is if there's a child who loves basketball at age 6, 7, 8, and 10, you can get a ton of experience practicing and learning that skill while also creating the environment where he is learning not just about how to play basketball, but how to market himself, how to run a basketball team, how to coach, all the legal aspects of the financial aspects of the data aspects of it. If the child is not being supported in learning those things, then the child is being exploited. And that's what happens in most educational environments. If you got game, you'll come to our school, but we're not going to get you ready for anything other than playing on the court. So, but again, if you have a child who's showing interest in photography, a child who's showing interest in I'm going to make up this again, bugs, anything that's unique that they are showing interest in, get out so that you can give that child the space to go deep into that area, to learn how to research it, to start to connect with other people in other parts of the world that share that interest. And we don't know that necessarily that kid's going to become an entomologist, but we know that kid is going to learn how to learn, and whether he's interested in entomology or something else, he's going to take that skill of learning and apply it someplace else if he moves to another area of interest.
100%. So those last two categories, those are the ones that immediately came to my mind.
Yeah.
Was athletics.
Like
I worked with a guy who essentially saved and like built the school program at a school called IMG Academy. And IMG was very controversial because people were like, IMG basically they tell you straight up, hey, you're not going to college. You're going from here to whatever league you want to play in. So they have a lot of like pro tennis play, like a lot of international students for tennis. And you've now seen the first crop of like NBA players who, when they get drafted, it says IMG Academy. And their argument is very similar to yours, Matt. It's just like they literally sit in front of a parent and say, do you want your child to be exploited by Duke University?
Wow.
Or do you want them to have a robust learning program around them? And now they're looking into like NIL services. So like teaching those kids how you go from really talented basketball player to full business.
That's it.
I mean,
That's
Houston is like right now. So I mean, I'm a huge Rockets fan. Um,
no,
uh,
no. I'm not. I'm
I'm
not arguing with you on that. But go on.
yeah, but KJ Martin, who plays on the Houston Rockets, is, if you are a basketball fan, that's Kenyon Martin's son. He
Oh,
went to
really?
IMG Academy.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. KJ Martin is Kenyon Martin's son. Um,
Wait, where is IMG?
in Florida,
Oh,
in
it's
I
okay.
think Sarasota.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it's in Florida, and so he went to IMG and went straight to the NBA from IMG.
Hmm.
But what is so unique about his life, I just learned this because this creative agency that we partner with at the Reinvention Lab for our sneaker competition. So if you see like those
Yeah.
shoes
Yeah. Yeah.
behind me, whoop,
Yep.
other side. So the same brand that produces those. Well, if you watch the NBA All-Star game, KJ Martin was the first ever player to use a 3D printed basketball that didn't need any air, and he used it in the
What?
dunk contest. Well, that brand, that creative agency, did all of the creative assets for him. And so I was like, selfishly, I was like, tell me what it was like. Tell KJ, if he wants to build a school, I got him. Like, I was
Yes.
just like, tell.
Yes.
And they said, they were like, this young man came out of school knowing how to do business.
That's it.
Like they said, he knew. So
That's it.
that
That's it.
category,
Yes.
yeah,
So this is exactly the model, right? So I love basketball. Great. Love it. Let's go ahead and prepare you and let
yep,
you, through the lens of basketball, learn about everything you're going to need to be successful as an adult. And if you don't know how to
yeah,
market yourself in today's world, if you don't know how to, read a contract, if you don't know how to budget your money, you are going to get run over. And so these
mm-hmm,
kids who made it to the pros, are skilled in that. Those that didn't are also skilled in those things, and I'll bet you they're working somewhere in the bowels of the athletic environment, probably doing well.
yeah,
But it's because
yeah,
their interests drove their learning rather than a
that's right,
top-down. Here's what we're going to learn about today.
yeah.
So,
And here's
Gabrielle
one
says,
category.
great discussion. Thank you, Gabrielle.
Oh
Thanks for
yeah, yeah.
joining
Thank you.
today. Keep going, Mike. Sorry.
So this isn't necessarily a category that I would add, but this is a caveat that I would add to this. If your child has, if they have an interest and you can see, they don't have to be able to see it yet, but you can see a clear path to
Yes.
monetize this.
Oh, yeah.
I believe that's worth pulling them out, because there is no greater motivation than the extrinsic motivation of, I made money to do this.
Absolutely, dude.
Like, the example I get, my daughter is like, so she sees me with my camera and she's like, hey, I want to do that. So I said, all right, well, I'll get you this little Polaroid camera, and if you can, I'll just see what you do with it. So she's always coming back, hey, I need more film, I need more film. And one day I caught her by herself in her room, like setting up her toys, because she was like, well, I saw you like messing around with stuff, so I was like, I'm gonna try that. And like, no, nobody, I watched her like through the crack of the door for like 15 minutes, and I was like, okay, she's ready for the next level.
Yeah.
So I traded this microphone that I was selling on Facebook Marketplace. This guy was like, I'll give you this old DSLR. I was like, perfect, that's
Done.
perfect, that's exactly what I need.
Yeah.
So now she's learning what ISO means, she's learning what an f-stop, she's going out on these nature walks and taking pictures of ducks and
That's it.
flowers. And on our last nature walk, she said, when am I going to be able to get a camera like yours? Because I have like
Yeah. You
a
got
really good
the
camera.
upscale. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like so excited about this as somebody who like likes learning design.
Yeah.
I looked at her and I said, when you take 5 pictures that other people want from you, then I'll buy you a new camera. So she quickly realized, like, on that trip, like, I'm gonna have to take a lot of photos and I'm gonna have to learn a lot of things.
Yes.
But at 7 years old, I want to make sure, like, I saw this video from Marquez Brownlee, if you guys don't know, is like one of the biggest YouTubers in the world. He's a tech reviewer,
Oh,
and
yeah.
he started doing this when he was in high school. And somebody said, well, what's the key to your success? And he said, when my parents saw that this was my interest, they gave me everything I needed to continue to follow the rabbit trail. And I was like, boom, done for life. Like I'm what I'm doing, and you've said that on this podcast. Like
Yep.
that to me, if you can monetize and you can help get them to the point where they're gonna make money
Yep.
doing that thing, there is no greater way than looking at your kids saying, you already make $10,000 a month. Why would you go pay somebody to teach you what you already know? Right? Like that to me is that's
So
the key.
now you're talking about the power of entrepreneurship. And
Yep.
that, again, I've got this. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, right? I'm not. But I got to tell you, I'm becoming one. Here's why.
Yeah.
Because I keep saying to myself, why isn't entrepreneurship more embedded in our educational system? And I think it's because the businesses don't want competition. I mean, right? A 16-year-old well, heck, let me just go deeper. Let's go a 12-year-old who's discovered that they love photography. That person can be really disruptive. They can create all sorts of opportunities, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why would we slow that down? Why wouldn't we throw resources at that? Why wouldn't a school have a conversation with a parent and ask, "Hey, parent, what are you seeing in your child? What are the things that your child is showing real interest in? Because we want to partner with you in growing that interest." Schools don't do that. So I don't know if do you know about the Youth Entrepreneurship Award that we're doing?
Oh yeah, I mean, I've been all over that. Like I just sent it to advise a startup that does that helps young entrepreneurs. I just sent it. I was like, hey, we got to partner with.
Please do. Yeah. No, we're just giving away money because we're looking to find out how much learning is possible through entrepreneurship. And what we're learning is it is by far the best way for learning.
Absolutely.
Because every kid, to be an entrepreneur, think about this. To be an entrepreneur, you have to know how to solve problems every single doggone day. So your daughter, the challenge you put to your daughter was essentially, here's a problem, solve it, and you get a nicer camera. And now she's, okay, I want the camera, let me solve that problem. And she's going to solve it. And once she does, she's going to realize, hey, I didn't know how to solve that problem, but I figured it out. What's the next problem that I'm going to have to learn how to do? And I'll bet you I can figure that out too. Build a website, partner with somebody, travel, learn a language, whatever it might be. Those are all just problems that every entrepreneur has to deal with. And you never forget those skills.
I've always said it. Entrepreneurship is the entire school experience rolled up into one thing. It requires
exactly right.
Every last academic skill that you can think of.
That is exactly right.
Yeah, people my students I used to say this in class, and they'd say, well, why do I need to know the history of the United States? And I started talking to them about like bourbon collectors. I was like, okay, like let's talk about the economics of bourbon collecting, right? And then they saw like very quickly, like, oh, like if I understand the history of Prohibition, I can find rare bourbons before other people, buy them for $50 and sell them for $1,000. And I was like,
absolutely,
exactly. Like if you know the years and you know the dates and you know the locations, like, so it was like, I really do believe it with all of my heart. And like, there's a school that's about to launch in Fort Worth that I had a hand in building. It's called Freedom School of Arts and Entrepreneurship.
Ooh,
and
I want a link.
Yeah, I'll send it to you. The founder is, he and I, we were training to be teachers together, like way before, like when I started my teaching career, he had already been teaching for 12 years. And he was an older Black man. And I literally said to him, I said, hey, I'm going to spend every day with you. And so like, because of my relationship with him, I went into the classroom and I felt like I was the best in the building because I had a real innovative veteran
that you apprenticed with.
And so we said, hey, look, one of us is going to start a school at some point. When it happens, like just call the other. So he called me and was like, yo, I'm doing it. Jump on my board. And the reason why he gave it that name is because he said those two things for Black people, for Black boys, That's the key to freedom. And I was like, yo, that's it, right? They're going to start a venture fund inside the school. It's like entrepreneurship. I can rant about this all day. We should do another podcast about this.
Next week we're going to do about this next week, y'all. We're out of time, but this is a great point to kick us off for next week.
Right.
We're going to talk about entrepreneurship. For the folks that have joined us, thank you for joining us today. We're going to be back here every week at 7 p.m. Central Time, 8 p.m. Eastern. What is that? 5 p.m. Pacific. Dad's discussion, Dad's conversation. Andy Chan has joined us. Andy, thanks for joining. Oh, Andy, he's saying, as a former business owner, I agree with Mike's statement that being an entrepreneur is a complete use of a person's educational skills and action. So Andy is entirely in alignment.
Yep.
Andy, thanks for joining today, and I hope you're well. All right, so that's it for tonight. We will be here again next week. Mike, thanks for your conversation, brother. Always learn a lot from talking with you. Keep writing on LinkedIn, and for those that have a LinkedIn account, make sure you follow Mike Yates. He puts out some great commentary about education. So, Mike, we'll see you next week. All right, buddy?
All right, see you.
All right, brother. Bye-bye.